Hello everyone, welcome to the Rift. Today I want to talk about the biggest mistakes that I see new players make, as well as answer some of the questions that new players tend to have concerning gameplay. I'm going to go over 5 of the most frequent mistakes that I see newer players tend to make in this game, as well as a couple of additional tips and tricks. Alright, we've got a lot to talk about today, so let's just jump right into it. But first, if you're enjoying the content, then make sure that you like the video and feel free to smash that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, I have a link to my Patreon in the video description. Also, I have channel memberships now. They're just $1 and you get these nice badges next to your name whenever you comment or chat in live streams. Thank you to everybody who supports the channel, even just by watching videos. I really appreciate it. Alright, back to the video. Perhaps one of the biggest mistakes that I see new players make in this game is developing their board or spending their resources or spending their energy before they go into combat on their turn. What I mean by this is, say we have 5 energy and we spend it to develop a Yordle and a Noxus Hopeful into our base. If our plan this turn is to use the Ravenbloom student that we already have on our board readied in our base to try and attack onto this battlefield, generally doing things in this order is going to be a mistake. And the reason for that is now when we attack this field, we are displaying to our opponent with our exhausted resources that we are no longer able to interact during this combat. So if our opponent has a unit defending on this field and they have energy to spend and we don't, they can play combat tricks like this on guard to try and turn this battle in their favor. Instead of developing in our base and spending our energy first, if we move into combat first, we're showing our opponent that we have 5 energy open, and as long as we have cards in our hand, we could be potentially threatening combat tricks and interaction of our own. So your opponent is now faced with a choice of whether or not they actually want to commit their combat trick, because if they choose to do so, now, since we have energy to spend in this combat, we could play a combat trick of our own potentially to win this combat and potentially force more interaction out of our opponent. Seeing as how we have 5 energy open and are threatening an attack here, they could also just let our attack go through and let their unit be destroyed, which is not something that would really happen if we were to have 0 energy available. Basically, when we're playing like this, we're trying to make our opponent guess as to what we're going to do and what we could have. It presents them with a choice and a dilemma to try and solve instead of presenting them with perfect information. Because if we tap out and exhaust all of our runes to develop guys in our base and then swing in with a unit, we are giving our opponent perfect information in this scenario. They know with absolute certainty that we do not have any combat tricks in this scenario because we have no energy and we're in these specific colors. So our opponent gets to respond to this scenario in whatever way they want to, essentially. This topic segues into the next big mistake that I see newer players make, and that is tapping out in general, specifically when passing their turn. Now, this is not always a mistake. It is going to depend largely on the matchup that you're playing and the current board state, but a lot of the time I see people make plays where they will exhaust all of their runes to play units into their base to develop their board presence, and then they end up losing because cards like this exist. And this card destroys both of these things and sets you back an entire turn in terms of development and tempo, and could just be a game-losing play by itself. Obviously, there are times when plays like this aren't going to be that bad. This is fine against this, but loses to this and this in combination. Now, sometimes you're not going to have a choice but to try and just develop units and hope your opponent doesn't have something like this, but it's a trading card game. Sometimes it just be like that. Your opponent just has the out and you go next. The point is to identify the best possible play you have in the given scenario, and this is accomplished by thinking about options that your opponent could have available to them next turn, how likely those options are to happen, thinking about all of the different play lines you have available to you at the given moment, and how safe, risky, and rewarding each of those lines is, and selecting the line of play that will give you the best odds of success. One of the main reasons that tapping out and exhausting all of your energy as you pass your turn is so risky is because, as I've mentioned before, you're giving your opponent perfect information, so they're able to play out their next turn in whatever way they want to without having to fear or think about any potential interaction from you because you don't have any energy to play any interaction. Another more general tip is just to be aware of your opponent's available options in any given situation. A classic example example of this that happens quite a lot in this current format is your opponent having 2 energy up while they're playing a green deck, while it is currently your turn to either attack or try and do other things. Just from them presenting these 2 green energy as a threat, you can know that there are a handful of options available to your opponent as counterplay in this current moment. Cards like Defy, Discipline, and On Guard are all cards very commonly played in this format and are all possible responses from your opponent when they have 2 energy up. Given this information and these possibilities, you should be thinking about how you should lay out your turn, how you should attack, and if you should attack if you're thinking about doing so. And as I've said before, considering all of the options available to you and all of the lines of play that you could potentially go for is very important. If you're thinking of initiating combat and trying to attack one of their units, you should be aware of the options available to them to try and stop your attack. If you have responses of your own available to you, and how likely your attack is to actually go through. Also consider things like if you even need to attack in the first place, and how bad it would even be if your attack doesn't work. Again, if your only option to try and win the current game is to initiate an attack and just hope they don't have the right answers in their hand to stop that attack, then it's important to identify that you're in this kind of situation and that this is your only current win condition. Shifting topics a bit to something a little different, a common question that I see asked a lot is something along the lines of, when should I hold? When should I try to be holding or conquering? When should I be stacking units, or when should I be developing in base? Questions like these. And I've come up with a general set of guidelines for when you should try to be holding, at least in this current format. The most obvious time I think that you should be trying to hold onto a field, committing as many resources as possible to try and defend that field, is when your opponent is at 6 points and they are presenting a potential lethal next turn. What I mean by a potential lethal is that they could have a way to win the game available to them that isn't currently displayed on the board. Obviously, if your opponent has 2 units already on the board, they can go and conquer both fields, so you're going to need to try and wall them out and defend against their attack. But even if they have 1 unit available, this is still a potential lethal on open battlefields because of cards like Thousand-Tailed Watcher existing and other accelerating units, and ways that you can utilize units immediately. In situations where your opponent is at 6 points and potentially threatening lethal, essentially the only option available to you is to try and either win the game right now or to try and prevent your opponent from winning the game next turn through something like holding. If you could defend your battlefield with enough might and maybe even something else, you may be able to prevent your opponent from winning the game and you'll get to play another turn. Another time that you would want to try and hold is when your opponent is ahead in points and winning the points race. If your opponent is ahead in points, they're going to get to 6 first and threaten lethal before you can, so you're going to need to try and wall them out from scoring for maybe a turn, maybe even more, to give you a better shot at trying to win this current game. Making plays like this can obviously backfire, especially if you way overcommit things and get super blown out, but if this is your only win condition in the current matchup, given the current game state, then it may just be the only thing you can go for. Another good reason I've found to try and hold is to wall out very small units from being able to score in the early to mid game. Specifically, this comes up a lot against Victor. His 1 might recruit tokens get walled out very easily by a lot of Dex units, and a lot of the time playing like this will make your opponent commit resources to try and overtake you, whereas if you just left your units in base, they get to score points for free using their tokens, which they really don't care about dying. The last reason that you should be trying to hold is when it's perfectly safe to do so. So a lot of the time, what I do when I play set is I will have a yellow set with a buff just chilling on a field. He defends for 7 might total, which is pretty good. So the opponent is going to have to commit some resources into dealing with him. This will be a positive trade for me and I will gain a resource advantage. And when he dies, I really don't lose anything except just the buff. And paying power costs for this guy, but those are most of the time negligible costs to pay, and it's worth it to force actual resources out of my opponent. You can also do similar things with Zhonya's. If you lose combat and you lose your Zhonya's, it really doesn't matter that much. You just paid 2 energy for it. Also, when you're on Reaver's Row, there's currently no risk of your unit dying in combat, really. All you have to worry about is spells, so this is usually a pretty safe play to make. So to summarize briefly, you should really only be trying to hold in this current format when you have to, or it's perfectly safe to do so. And that's as a general rule of thumb. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions to this rule, but a lot of the time I see people trying to stack on fields in the mid game and they get blown out and lose all their units when they really should have just committed minimally and developed in base for a counterattack if their unit actually gets swung over. Even in decks like Ari, whose legend effect attack benefits holding, I would still generally stay away from the gameplay pattern of just trying to hold and stacking units, just because of the sheer power of attacking in general in this format, and the risk that is currently associated with trying to defend battlefields. Stemming off from this idea, the last mistake that I see people make is keeping units at battlefields too long and not bringing them back to base. Unless you're in one of the situations that I outlined before in which holding is actually good, you should probably just bring it back to base because it's much safer there. If you just keep it on a battlefield without a good reason, chances are you're probably just going to lose it for free. Of course, this doesn't apply to something like Reaver's Row, where it's safe to keep units here because you can't really lose them in combat. But yeah, in general, with the current card pool, the current format, and just how attacking works in general, it's by and large more powerful, safer, and easier to try and attack things than it is to try and defend things. There are so many incredible options to try and attack things in this format right now, and getting blown out by these options when you're trying to hold when you really should be is definitely something you want to avoid. Alright, so those are some helpful tips and general gameplay advice that I would recommend newer players to follow as rules of thumb, at least until you improve at the game to a point where you understand how and when to break these rules. Let me know if I missed anything down in the comments, or if you have any other tips that you want to add. Alright, thank you guys for watching. Take care.